Hi, this is Sherri Gallagher with Technicon Company Incorporated. Today this video is going to look at Section 7 of ISO 9001-2015, which is the support function. What are the support functions? Well, this is the point where an auditor moves from interviewing top management to interviewing the middle management and the workforce in general. These are the responsibilities top management delegates. This section of the standard has 4 different elements related to making production. They are people, including organizational knowledge, competency, awareness, as well as work environment; communication, who, what, to whom, and when and how; monitoring and measuring, focusing on calibration and software validation; and documented information, which is procedures, work instruction forms, training documents, and records. You may have noticed that I took these in a different order than ISO 9001-2015 standard. The standard starts out with the general category of resources. It makes a broad sweeping statement about people, then goes on to infrastructure and the tools to monitor and measure. It then goes to organizational knowledge, which is people. The next 2 major sections, competence and awareness, are talking about people and knowledge. I have chosen to group all the elements addressing people as one element. The first requirement is to transition from top management to the rest of the company. The directive is to select the right people to do the job. Top management has decided in the scope what will be done in-house and what will not. If this is an internet security company, the people with strong computer skills are needed. If this is a tool and die maker, then people skilled in precision machining are needed. If the product requires plating, will it be done in-house or contracted out? Management has already answered those questions by defining the scope, quality policy, and quality objectives. Now human resources is tasked with finding the right people. Human resources must identify the necessary competency for each position. Typically, HR will do this with job descriptions. Job descriptions should be revised, should be revision controlled, and are part of documented information. Awareness is usually covered in training. New employees are shown the quality policy and trained on the perception of the company. Employees are also shown or may participate in developing the quality objectives and should have an understanding of their personal contribution to achieving those objectives and their impact creating products that meet requirements. Part of awareness is organizational knowledge. Organizational knowledge should be transferred to employees performing the work through training programs. Many programs consist of the employee currently performing the task training others to do the same thing. While this meets the minimum of the standard, there are inherent issues in not having a documented training script and/or video. For example, the employee performing the task knows that a few years earlier there was an issue with a product being damaged in shipment. To prevent the damage, protective packing was added to the corners of the product. A new employee is trained on the task but is unaware of the previous issue, because there was no mention of it in the training program. The new employee decides they can reduce expenses and waste of the added packing materials and don't use them. They may even turn it in as an improvement suggestion. This causes the previous problem to return. Organizational knowledge should be documented in the training programs. Where reasonable explanations why a task is being performed may help other employees in their day-to-day decision-making. Included under people is the impact of infrastructure and work environment. In prior editions of the standard, the auditor was directed to make sure the infrastructure was adequate. Usually if the roof wasn't leaking and the air temperature was slightly moderated to be livable, the infrastructure was considered adequate. With ISO 9001-2015, the auditor must look at the buildings and software and information technologies and determine if they are adequately support the work performed. A clarification in 2015 edition has been added to the environment. The auditor takes into account the social and psychological factors as well as physical factors that could influence the conformity of the product. The auditor takes guidance from the impact on the conformance of the product. This is not an easy task and is usually very difficult finding to write, since findings must be based on observed evidence. Communication. This is one of the most concise sections of the standard. The organization will determine what it will and will not communicate, when it will communicate, who will receive the communication, how the communication will occur, and who will do the communicating. This applies both internally and externally. For example, a pharmaceutical company decides who, when, and how a recall is communicated. Internally, top management may decide certain financial information will not be communicated to the employees. This is decided by the organization and varies from business to business. There is no requirement to document the communication plan. Communication is fairly straightforward. Communication can be related to the documented information when documented information is used to communicate. Monitoring and measuring resources focuses mainly on calibration. The term resources is used so auditors also look at software and any tool being used to determine conformance to requirements. One of the nice clarifications in ISO 9001-2015 for auditors is considering calibration as not applicable. This is important when auditing service industries, and some auditors struggle with how to handle this element under previous editions of the standard. The ability to not audit calibration is clearer in the 2015 edition. When I am consulting, I warn my clients, calibration is the auditor candy store for findings. Most auditors have the ability to find the one single measuring device that is past its calibration due date and in use. Some things to look for are the correct devices being used for the measurement tolerance. If the tolerance is plus or minus a half inch, then a ruler or tape measure is a better tool than a micrometer. All measuring devices should be traceable to the national standards such as NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology. Yep, even the commercially purchased tape measure or ruler that you got at Home Depot. The organization should also have a plan to address what will be done if a gauge that has been used to accept product is found out of calibration. An organization should be able to identify what product was tested with what gauge and decide if the product has to be retested or not. One of the ways I see clients avoiding the need for reset testing is to use gauges with a higher precision than is necessary. If the gauge is found to be slightly out of calibration, the company can show it would not affect product conformance. This still shouldn't create the situation of using a micrometer for a ruler. All devices used to determine conformance must be evaluated to ensure their continued fitness for use. If the organization has created a specialty gauge, the organization must define the gauge's accuracy and fitness for use. If a gauge is not standardized, a method may be used to define its measurement capability, is a gauge repeatability and reproducibility study. This is not a requirement of ISO 9001-2015, but it can be accepted by an auditor. Expect a lot of questions if your organization is in this situation. Finally, if software is used to test performance to requirements, the software must be validated as effective. This usually applies to proprietary software. Commercially available software does not need to be validated, and software used in office work and not used in to determine conformance to requirements like Excel or Microsoft does not require validation by the organization for ISO 9001-2015. Documented information is a new term, but not a new understanding. The organization must determine what needs to be documented, how long documents will be maintained, where they can be found, how they are generated and updated, and who is the deciding authority for acceptance. Documents must be readily available at the point of use and protected from deterioration. This is that loop back to communication in Section 7.4 of ISO 9001-2015. Documented information is considered an acceptable tool for communication. Historically, procedures and work instructions met these requirements. What is new is the standard now allows the auditor to take into account the size of the organization and the complexity of the product. There is no longer a requirement for specific procedures since some companies may be able to control the quality management system without them. For example, I have one client who uses videos in place of procedures. While the procedure is not needed, the organization must communicate the documented information. The key is the organization decides what needs to be documented, but once that decision is made, the documents must be followed. Documented information includes what the 2008 edition identified as records. Records are evidence of conformity, and they must also be protected from deterioration, damage, or alteration. Their storage, retention, and disposition must be defined and implemented. A decade or so ago, some auditors were writing findings for failure to dispose of records. The finding usually was based on a failure to follow the disposal time frame identified by the organization as necessary. The easiest way to avoid this finding is to define a minimum retention period and disposable method. If records are retained for a longer period, it is not a finding as long as a maximum retention period is not defined. So there you have Section 7 support of ISO 9001-2015. Very little of these requirements are new. In most cases, they have been renamed, and the auditor has been given leeway to determine if they will be adequately addressed considering the size of the company and the complexity of the product. Next up, we'll be looking at operations, which will be broken into two parts, design and operations. So I hope you'll check them out. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us. Our website is technicon.com. Our email is technicon1986@sbcglobal.net. And our phone number is 708-814-3685. Go out and have a glorious day.